Hello and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris,
I'm Randall.
and this is our 100th episode. Hooray! Hey, Randall, we
Yay.
did it. We did it. We did it. We did it. And like we've done 99 times before, I'm going to say it again before we start the show. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Randall, for the 100th time, what's a pretty good way to reach us?
Well, check out our website, chrisandrandall.com. Also, you can go to our Facebook page, Arts and Entertainment with Chris and Randall. Various ways to reach us. The Facebook page, good place to leave a comment.
Excellent. Okay, so what we're going to do today, we first have to make a big announcement. But before we do that, I just want to let you know, today we're going to do kind of like an overview. We've now done 99 episodes, and this is our 100th episode. We're going to look at what are the big takeaways. What are the things about the specific areas of arts and entertainment, like film and TV, radio, music, Gen X, different topics that have been reoccurring, bigger thematic things that we could have done in a single episode, and really kind of now say, what are the bigger questions, and also look at what we've done and how's it landed with you guys, what we'd like to do differently. Speaking of what we like to do differently, here is our big announcement. When we first started in the beginning of the pandemic, we were a weekly show. And as you've kind of probably noticed in the last couple of months, our ability to put out new episodes every week has not been quite as consistent. And now, fortunately or unfortunately, Randall and I we're out of the pandemic. We are taking on new responsibilities, new opportunities. So for the time being, we're going on hiatus. Now, we'll be gone for a couple of months, and then we will come back, but we're not going to be putting out the quantity of episodes that you're used to, but we will be definitely putting out quality. So it's going to be a long time till we get to episode 150 or 200, but I will promise, even if we're not going to be as consistent or as often, we will still continue, and we will always do quality stuff and new and exciting stuff that, you'll see in the coming months when we return from our extended hiatus. Until then, let's get into this episode. So, Randall, 100, how does it feel?
It feels like, wow, we put a lot of work into this show. We spent many, many hours, not just the recording side of it. Me, I've spent a lot of time in post-production, so this show's a lot of work, Chris.
Especially for Randall, because I know the way we record this show and have always is what we use Zoom, is that right? Is that our platform?
Yeah, we use Zoom to record. Zoom is great for podcasts. Before COVID, I didn't know what Zoom was, I think.
Yeah.
And then
no one knew.
But it's like because we tried to do a podcast before Zoom, never released, and we tried to do a face to face. But Zoom it solves a lot of problems. Like if anybody today wants to make a podcast, Zoom is the way to go, I think. I think
the only hard thing about it is the post, right? You have to get the sound levels right, and
the post is easy. I think it's just time consuming. I think the hard part is making sure that each participant, their setup is good. Okay, so like I've been fighting that for the whole time. I'm not totally satisfied with every technical setup that we've ever had with guests, but I do my best.
Yeah, there's definitely been a learning curve, and as you guys have probably noticed too, we are getting more guests. That's one of the new changes. I think that it's not that, Randall, I've grown bored of talking to you like any long relationship, though. In fact, I have grown very bored of talking to you. But there's only so much that Randall and I are experts in. And we live here in Los Angeles. I'm from New York City. We have lots of different friends and people we know in the entertainment and arts who they have great stuff to offer, and we'll definitely bring in more people from the world, people who either have expert opinions or expert experience. Have you enjoyed doing that, Randall?
Yeah, of course. So when are we going to come back? Like in a couple months, you think? Like maybe in
I'm not really sure when. I know that before the year is over, this is 2022. I'm sure we will do a few more episodes. I'm off to grad school. I'm going to make a mad attempt to get a second master's this time. Here's a surprise in English literature. I'm going to hopefully become an English professor. And I know, Randall, you've got your foot in a lot of stuff, but hey, we're here. Let's focus on today, which is 100 episodes, looking back, and we're going to do this is we're just going to before we even get into the subjects, I've always been curious, Randall, what has been our most popular episodes? Where have we gotten the highest rating?
All right, let me pull up that information. But before we get to that, just let me say that, I mean, when we come back and you want to be a guest, you have something you want to talk about, you like our show, then send us a message.
As long as you've got something interesting to say and some
you should
information to back it.
You should come up with a topic, though. You shouldn't just like say, I want to be a guest, and then we'll be like, well, what do you want to talk about? And you say, I don't know.
Obviously,
you need to know.
I like Star Wars. What do you like about Star Wars? It's great. What's your favorite Star Wars? The one where they fight in space. That's pretty cool, and I like the robots. But hey, if you're, somebody who maybe has a great story about having worked on the Star Wars film, or you have a unique theory about Star Wars, or you have a large collection of Star Wars memorabilia and you want to talk about something, that puts you slightly ahead of the rest of the people who go, yeah, that's C-3PO. And that's all I wanted to say.
Do you, so just have a topic. So Chris, regarding podcast numbers, do you want to hear which episodes are the most downloaded?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
I do.
I'll read some of the most downloaded. So the most downloaded show is the Modernism versus Post-Modernism episode.
Oh my
6.
God, that was like at the very beginning.
Yeah, a lot of the most downloaded are at the very beginning because, a lot of times when people find a podcast, they just download all the episodes and they start listening. So a lot of the earlier episodes are going to have the most downloads. So Modernism versus Postmodernism, Punk Rock, 1980s Comedies Part 3, Science Fiction TV Shows We're Watching, Hipster Hollywood in the 60s. These are all very early episodes. Chris's latest obsession with YouTube music in the time of COVID. Randall introduces a new genre, Bonkers Sci-Fi. Generation X growing up with radio. Watchmen, the comic, stand-up favorites, new and old. So that was, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, that was the top 10. Now, let me just say, though, one metric they use in podcasting is downloads in the first 7 days. So, and that's like an important metric in podcasting. I'll just say, it's really our later episodes that started picking up steam, Chris. I think we actually are starting to build an audience. So the most downloaded in the first 7 days was episode 94. What is Generation X humor? And that was a fun show, right, Chris? That was a more fun the show than I thought it'd be. Episode 96, 21st Century Music Biopic with guest Bill Gucwa. 95, How to Sell NFT Art. That was my brother was a guest. Episode 82, Muppet Christmas Carol, where we just talked about the Muppet Christmas Carol. And, that was kind of like a continuation because, we did, we did 2 episodes on A Christmas Carol the year before.
So that's episode 3. We'll get into our fascination with A Christmas Carol later, but that's good to know that
let me finish the top 10. Episode 91 was The Abstract Moment. That was in art. That was a great. I mean, that was like a 5-part series of fine art. It culminated with with World War II and Hitler. Episode 90, The Road to Modernism, part of that series. Episode 62, The Arts Entertainment of the 4th of July. That was a surprisingly downloaded episode. I didn't think it would be so popular. Episode 80, Turkeys That Are So Bad They're Good. That was your brainchild, Chris. Episode 85, Wild Cards, Part 1 and 2, The King of Comedy. We talked about the King of Comedy. I think there's a lot of young kids, they watch Joker and they had no idea what the King of Comedy was. So, and then the in 10th place is episode 76, Why Squid Game is Karl Marx's favorite show. And, I just want to say about that is I used to advertise on Facebook this show, and by the way, it didn't get us anything, but but I stopped after this episode. because because the title's kind of humorous, right? Why Squid Game is Karl Marx's favorite show?
Yeah.
Because Karl Marx has been dead for like what 100 years or something.
I don't believe Karl Marx had a Netflix streaming subscription in
Right,
the late 19th century.
right. So obviously it's facetious, right? The
Right.
title, but when I tried to advertise this title on Facebook, they flagged it. They flagged the advertising campaign for being factually inaccurate.
Oh.
So I was like, I gave up on Facebook advertising at that
Oh,
point.
wait a second. I'm pretty sure there's a couple of dudes out on planet Earth whose first name is Carl or Charlie, whose last name is Marx, and they just happen to be Netflix subscribers. I just think, that's not, it is factually true. I will put money on this. YouTube, since you are also going to block us, there is definitely a guy who is a subscriber at Netflix whose first name is Carl, maybe with a C, last name Marx, maybe Carl Thomas Marx, and he watched Squid Game because all the other people at work did, and he didn't want to, FOMO it.
We've done. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But I didn't bother making an argument like that to Facebook. I just gave up. But all the Gen X shows we do, they seem to get some traction. I think it's because Gen X is like it's always been for Gen X. It's a demographic that no actual companies or advertisers or media really care about. So
actually, that's a good.
So we're filling a niche.
That is a really good jumping off point. So, in the time that we've been doing this show, you guys have gotten to know who we are. We're two middle-aged men here living in Los Angeles. Randall lives in West Hollywood. I live in Westwood by UCLA, and you've learned a lot about us. But over the course of time, through metrics and communication, we have identified not everybody, obviously, who listens to us, but the majority of people who listen to us. And surprise, surprise, most of you are like us. Randall, you were born in the middle of Gen X. I'm born literally a few months into Gen X. So a lot of the people who listen to us just happen to be Gen X. And I think that one of the things, if I was starting the show all over again with you from scratch, and folks, if you're thinking about doing a podcast, I really would recommend this. I would probably even just say arts and entertainment from the Gen X perspective, because I really think, Randall, that there isn't, Gen X in general, we just don't get a lot of, isn't there some meme right now going around about millennials at work, Gen Y at work, and boomers at work, and it just does not even mention Gen X at work.
There's a million memes like that going around. Yeah, there was there's a lot of Gen X memes going around where major magazines do articles listing the generations and they leave Gen X out. They're always
yeah. So
no one cares about Gen X.
Right.
No one,
so except for Gen X. So I will say that
no, we don't even care.
No, actually, it's the opposite, Randall. Let's own it. Let's own it. I think it's fair to say that one of the reasons I think why the shows that we've done about Gen X and comedy and Gen X and music and Gen X and film, we've done a lot about the 80s and the 70s and even in a bit of the 90s, is because there really isn't. I watch a lot of YouTube, and I will admit that almost every topic that Randall and I that we cover, somebody else is just killing it. No, actually 10 people are just killing it. There's definitely people right now who just own Marvel comics, who own movies, who own TV or books. But I don't see anybody outside of you and I who are really just talking about, hey, if you grew up between 1965 and 1982, here's how you're going to feel about arts and entertainment.
Chris, I don't know if I agree with that. I feel like we've always on the show tried to come up with topics that were unique, that were different, that other people weren't doing. And I think we've done that, but
no, I'm not saying that. I'm just going to be really clear. I'm not saying the questions we ask aren't unique. The questions that we ask are unique. But what I'm saying is the topic of movies, TV, radio, comic books.
Oh
That's
yeah, well
something
of course, everybody
everybody,
talks about art,
right? But my
but they
point
talk
is,
about it in a very superficial way. I
well,
mean,
I
I
don't.
think we were
I
trying
think
to go
there's some.
deeper, right?
No, there's some great people out there who are just killing it, and I watch them every day on YouTube. They don't need me because they got a billion subscribers to pump them. But my point is, for all that work, great work that's being done, it seems like no one wants to touch Gen X except for you and me. And one of the things I really hope we get to do more of, and probably we will, because hey, I'm 50% of the show, is more Gen X oriented shows where we do kind of maybe put more of
Well,
our focus on our main listeners and watchers.
yeah, maybe. Well, one thing I think that a lot of these other shows do, other shows that cover arts and entertainment, they tend to be more commercial focused. They're focused on like, whatever's selling, the latest movie or whatever. And I've never felt the need to talk about that. I always want to talk about
there's
art.
some really good stuff that have. I'm not gonna lie. There's stuff that where they go back into the past. They cover obscure stuff. I mean, I'm a real junkie for YouTube shows like the ones we produce. So I consume massively. And let me just say, Gen X is just that's sadly once again. So when we come back, we'll probably continue to do more Gen X-y things. Maybe in the future, we may even just make this a more Gen X show. But you raised a good point, which is let's look at one entire category of art that does not get as much discussion as often, and one that I've always thought was really tricky. But let's deal with the big takeaways about visual art. In fact, we just did. Well, let's say Randall, we just did a whole bunch of episodes on the evolution of art from impressionism to abstractionism.
Yeah, well, it was like a 5-part series. And it started with me wondering about Hitler's obsession with fine art, the Nazis' obsession with fine art. And so I had to go all the way back and find out where modern art came from, where abstract art came from. And it was such a crazy journey. I mean, we did like 5 episodes. It was more than 5 hours because it was probably like 6 hours.
I think it's the most time we've ever spent on a single subject consistently. It's almost a month and a half of episodes.
Yeah, I didn't think it would be so comprehensive, but it's just to answer these questions, we really went deep. I mean, to answer these questions, there was just so much. There was so much we had to go through, and as I did research, I kept finding more and more, more and more stuff, more and more wrinkles to the story, and it was really fascinating. I mean, you were fascinated by it, right, Chris? I mean, you were surprised by some of these things, right?
I would say that when it comes to the topic of visual arts, you, sir, have really done a great job of coming up with really unique hypotheses about art that I have never come across. And you have definitely done a lot of deep dives. I've been also thinking about and you've done this a few times. You've really focused on Marcel Duchamp.
Yeah, Duchamp.
And what was that particular? Well, a couple of things, I guess. Not found art.
The ready-mades?
The ready-mades. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about your fascination because it's come up more than once.
Mm-hmm.
So
we'll talk about.
Yeah, well, I want to know what is it that makes you so overall fascinated by that.
Well, we did well, you can listen to the episode. I mean, we did a whole episode of my favorite artist,
but
Marcel
beyond
Duchamp.
What you covered, like what is there something beyond what we've already discussed that has made you want to like just explore Duchamp more than other artists? Is there something?
Well, I just thought, everything with art, Chris, right? I mean, everybody that does anything with art, it always starts with just enjoying the art. And I've always loved Duchamp's art. I mean, even when I was very young, I saw Duchamp, I was exposed to Duchamp's art, and I thought it was amazing, I
mean, he is a very idiosyncratic artist. I mean, the fact that he is willing to just put his name on a toilet bowl or his artist descending a staircase is such an abstract observation.
I believe when I was a teenager, I was exposed to the ready-mades, the fountain where he tears a urinal off the wall,
right,
writes his name on it, not really his name, a pseudonym. And then he puts it on a pedestal in an art show, and he says it's a piece of art. I mean, I thought that was brilliant. I thought that was a great idea. I actually think I discovered Duchamp by reading about Warhol because, of course,
Really?
Warhol is influenced by Duchamp. Duchamp. Yeah, Duchamp was never that. I don't think Duchamp was ever really that huge. That well known and popular. And then when the pop artists started coming around, they were heavily influenced by Duchamp. And so yeah, I had to go back and look at Duchamp's work. Yeah, I mean, I've found that I have always liked art that was conceptual. I've always had a fascination more for conceptual art. Art that has a strong philosophy behind it. So I've been to a lot of museums, and seen works, and yeah, I like artwork that is. Like I said, it's strong concepts. I mean,
I think you raise a good point, and I think that, and I'm saying this as someone who's more of a fan of figurative art. I don't that I don't love a great Rothko or a Kandinsky. Don't get me wrong, I love abstractionism, but I also like Hopper. I like Matisse. I like figurative. I like seeing how humanity is captured in recognizable shapes and realities. But I think that one thing that Americans have always really struggled with, and people in general have struggled with, is how to appreciate the visual arts, right? I mean, museums, and I think we've talked about it before, but it really bears repeating. So here in Los Angeles, I live in Westwood, and we have a very small but very nice museum called the Arm and Hammer, which, yes, is owned by the Arm and Hammer family, or was, and it's free. You can go in, and there's all sorts of new art exhibitions and stuff from the collection. Then up the street, there's the Getty Center, which is a great collection of art that goes right up to the very beginning of the 20th century. And then the only modern art after that is really sculpture and photography because Mr. Getty didn't like 20th century painting. And then there's the Getty Villa, which is antiquity. So these are free museums. And when I was in New York, up until maybe just a year or two ago, I would go to the Metropolitan because it was pay what you can. So I'd say, here's a quarter, endow a wing. Now they've gotten terrible and they're charging money. And I really want to say, and again, I just went to two different art exhibitions, one in Pasadena, museums that charge admission. I don't even care if it's the student price. And I know that student prices are still lower, or even, senior prices. I get that. But in a sense, what is really happening, and I think, and this is also true, by the way, of universities, I think that access to the visual arts, to the fine arts, are just getting so expensive that there's no way that people, we did a whole episode on this, and it hasn't changed. That I think one of the reasons why a lot of people don't get modern art is simply because the access to that kind of education and exposure requires money that most people can't have.
I really wonder about that, Chris. I mean, I know that the Nazis and Hitler were famous for hating modern art, and then, and the working man is always the caricature of the working man has always hated modern art, but I don't know how true
I'm not
that really
saying that they hate it. You really don't understand what I'm saying. I'm saying that you cannot appreciate something you don't have access to. And if you can't appreciate the value of something unless you know what it is. So if I was saying, hey, Randall, I have a museum and all I have in that museum is bananas. And I'm going to charge you $25 to stare at bananas. Or for $25, you can go see an amazing movie about your favorite superhero, or you can have a really good pizza. You can't assess value to something when you don't have any appreciation for it. And I just feel like the mistake that these very well endowed museums are making, among other places, is by charging patrons to come in, they are basically they're making themselves irrelevant. I feel like in the fine arts, one of the great problems, you see this with opera, ballet, and theater, and maybe this is really even a bigger question than just the visual arts, is that we charge people so much money for the fine arts. And a good education in the fine arts is not something you're going to get in a public school. It's rare that you're even going to get it on a university level. If you do, it's more likely to be in a private school. But the barrier of entry to that is way too high in this country. There are countries in the world where, regardless of your class structure, where you're born, you're going to get exposure to the fine arts. It's just a general part of your education.
Well, you have a point. I mean, I think part of it is, the general public is exposed to art. I mean, look at movies, and look at the millions upon millions of dollars they use to promote each movie that comes out, and that's just sheer promotion. Not to mention how much money goes into making them. So I mean, these, in the fine arts, in like outside of movies, outside of popular arts. There's not a lot of money, I don't think, being poured into. There's some money. There's not a lot of money being poured into promoting the art. Okay. So I mean, so there's a big gulf there. There's the art that's being commercialized, and then there's the art that's I don't know how to describe it. It just simply is.
Well, and that's a big problem too, because, and then especially we'll get on to other things right now, but the thing that we've noticed in contemporary visual art, in art, the artists that you really respond to as abstractionists, that art I like in figurative, well, so much of art is from the leftist perspective. So much of art challenges capitalism, challenges the way they think. There was a wonderful Marxist philosopher. He was an existential Marxist philosopher named Herbert Marcuse. And he was like you. He loved abstractionist art. And one of the things he said about a capitalist society is that they try to play down an appreciation for the more abstract, more irrational parts of art, because art creates a space for ideas, reflection, and contemplation. And we did a whole episode, one of my favorites, on the CIA backing abstractionist art, because they thought this was going to fight social realism. And it's very funny, because it does really show you that to the left, art is a form of protest, and to the right, art is a form of propaganda.
Well, I just want to say, I think if you look at the history of art, like all art, just about, the powers that be, like in every country in the world, in every political system, the powers that be are always censoring art, filtering art as per its political content. So if works come out, they don't like the political content, they'll try to censor it as much as they can. And you see that over and over, like, all areas of art. So
But to be
all through a history.
On the positive side, I mean, I was just in Hollywood the other day, and where there used to be a record store, there's now this immersive art center where people I believe, are immersing themselves in the art of Van Gogh. And you do see rising all over America, probably all over the world, these immersive art experiences. Have you been to any of them where you're...
I don't know. I can't remember now.
Well, I guess
don't think so.
They're projective spaces where you are like walking inside the painting. And they're super popular post-COVID. And we've done a number of episodes on the rise of digital art, the Bernie memes, which I thought was fascinating, your brother on NFT art. So it does feel to me that the internet is become a great liberator of bringing art to the masses free, in a way that it's kind of, I feel like the new gallery, the new museums are really the internet. And because there's no barrier of entry as an artist, and there's no barrier of entry as a viewer, I feel like if there's anything positive to be said, I really do think that the old guard, you must give us money or you must have this education, that those barriers are beginning to break down.
The internet's like the printing press 2.0. It's amazing.
That's actually great, because that's the segue into the next thing. So you just said the printing press, which is literature and fiction. And as somebody who's about to now learn how to teach it, I have to admit, I had expected we would have done more episodes on literature and fiction, but we have done a few outside of Dickens, which we'll get to in a sec. We have done episodes on science fiction literature. You did a really great takedown on YA fiction. Do you feel, by the way, because when you first did that takedown years ago, I've known Randall for 20 years. I remember back in the beginning of the century, you just ripped into the class structure, cultural imperialism of Harry Potter. Do you remember that takedown?
I don't. I'll have to listen to the episode again. I don't remember, but yeah, I know. I know exactly what I think about Harry Potter. I still think it. Yeah.
Well, but just briefly remind us again.
Well, I mean, it's something I always see in a lot of works, not just Harry Potter, but Star Wars. It's like a lot of our fantasy works. There is a class structure, and a lot of fantasy works do this disgusting trick, a really reprehensible trick, where they take the hero and they start the hero out in the lower classes. So the audience comes to believe, oh, this hero is from the lower classes. He's like us, right? Like Harry Potter's like us. But then you come to find out he's actually a secret blue blood. He's a secret aristocrat, because you know what that says, Chris? That says that you disgusting vermin from the lower classes, you thought you could be the hero. You thought you could climb up the social hierarchy and go to the top based on merit. No, you are always going to be vermin. You have to be born to the class you're in. You have, if you want to be better than you are, you have to be born into it, because that's what Harry Potter says. Harry Potter says that if you're born in the lower classes, you are disgusting vermin, and you will remain disgusting vermin forever because of who your parents are.
I mean, well, I think that's a very strong point. I will say, certainly in a lot of romance fiction, the stories are normally about either a woman who has fallen. Her father was the baron, and then he somehow died and left them penniless. Now she must live on a farm, or she comes from a hardworking family who just happens to catch the eye of a prince. So there is this, we tend to romanticize class elevation in literature and in fiction. It's the same as the idea that you are the special. There's the messianic, which you definitely see in Harry Potter, and you definitely see in Star Wars. We'll get to it, and other things where if it's not that you are thrown down to the wrong class, you need to either be elevated to the class, or you are the next Messiah, and you're really a real special guy. And until you defeat the forces of evil, you're not going to get the girl. And by the way, that's another toxic thing that we never really talk about in fiction, is how the woman or the man, the love interest, is the reward for doing good. And that the sole agency of that character is just to exist so that our hero can get that. But I feel like I'm kind of going too much on a tirade. We covered YA fiction, and we covered a lot of Dickens, which is great, because Dickens is a guy who really, I mean, I think it's interesting to think. I thought, what is the most adapted story that was written in the last 200 years? I do believe it's A Christmas Carol, right?
Right. I did some research and on the internet, and I tried, and I think A Christmas Carol could be the most adapted work in English, in the English language. And I think before we started, we were going to do an episode on Christmas Carol because it was Christmas, right?
Yeah.
And as I did the research, as we both did the research, we found out that I started anyway. I think you did too. I started to have formed the opinion that Christmas Carol is probably the most adapted work, just based on objective numbers. But The Christmas Carol is probably also the greatest work in terms of just aesthetics and philosophy. It's probably the greatest work in English literature. And
wow,
I mean, that's what I said in the episode. Remember, Chris? And
I forgot. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I mean, and so I said that. I came to the conclusion that Christmas Carol is the greatest masterpiece of the English language is A Christmas Carol.
Well, and it's funny to say
not
that.
Shakespeare.
Hold on. I just want to throw something out, which is that I'm sure there's a lot of listeners. It wouldn't be me, but there's a lot of listeners right now going, "Hey, what about The Great Gatsby?" And it is fascinating to think in the parallelism between The Great Gatsby and A Christmas Carol, which is not even that far apart in time, less than 70 some odd years between the two. And certainly Fitzgerald was quite aware of A Christmas Carol. I'm sure he listened to it growing up as a small boy in Minnesota. But it is a very fascinating thing that here we've just done this whole thing on how fiction romanticizes class elevation. and both Great Gatsby and definitely Christmas Carol refute that premise, right?
Uh, you know, uh, I'm remembering back to our discussion about Christmas Carol. We took it apart in multiple different ways, including the class aspect, and I think, I'm remembering back to the discussion. I think we came to the conclusion that Christmas Carol was less about class and more about what a capitalist system does to you. Because Scrooge, it ends up being uh, the ultimate capitalist. The ultimate capitalist. He just spends his life working. He just spends his entire life is devoted to making money.
Well, Scrooge loses his humanity, right?
Right. He loses humanity because he buys into the capitalist system where all he's going to do is make money. That's all he cares about. And so he loses his humanity because capitalism is almost in direct confrontation with humanity.
So, Randall, I think this kind of really points out the way that we go about approaching literature, which is whether it was really dealing with Dickens and estrangement or a class perspective or a socioeconomic perspective. We've also done episodes where we talk about science fiction stories that are dystopian. But I would say in general, whether we're talking about books, superheroes, any work of fiction, I've noticed that the overall theme isn't to really use literary terms as much as look at it as a social artifact. What is it saying about society? What is it saying about how we live? What is the criticisms it's making? What is it saying about where we're headed? Very rarely it even says about how we live. So it's interesting to think that, you were an English major in college. I certainly took a lot of English courses, and now I'm going to be an English teacher. And that we've really never treated fiction. We've never really looked at fiction as a work of art. We've almost always looked at fiction as a form of cultural analysis and social criticism. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's what art does, right? I mean, it can be.
It's one way you can do it. It's not. It's certainly not the only. We could just talk about it in a very technical sense. We can talk about it, but for whatever reason, you and I just gravitate in that way, which is fine. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's interesting that's where our heads have been at with a lot of it.
I guess that's what we find most interesting. What I find most interesting about some of this art, I mean, personally, because, like watching something like Harry Potter or Star Wars, it like stands out to me and nobody talks about it. So,
well, I mean, there's a lot of great channels dedicated to this stuff, but we tend to not talk about it we don't talk about like what life would be like on Tatooine, or why Obi-Wan Kenobi is the most important character in the Star Wars saga.
Well, if there, Chris, if there is somebody who has discussed the absolutely reprehensible class depiction in Star Wars on YouTube or anywhere, I would like to hear about them because I haven't.
Oh, I agree with you. That's my point. My point is that it tends to look more at it from a fan. I wouldn't say a fan's perspective, but I would definitely say that within the context of its own work. Now, we have done a lot on Star Wars, especially Boba Fett, on animation with Star Wars. And I have to say, that's more you than me. Not that I don't love Star Wars, but what do you think it is about Star Wars that is so key to our generation? Why do you think people just, why do we write so much about it? Why do we talk so much about it? Why is it still almost 50 years on such a cultural touchstone?
Well, it's saleable. I mean, George Lucas tried to make popcorn entertainment. He tried to make something, big, something popular. He tried to make popular art. So, I mean, there was that. I think, a lot of us, especially Generation X, we grew up with Star Wars. We loved it. Played with the toys as kids. I mean, Star Wars is like Lucas envisioned it as like this whole like entertainment ecosystem, with toys and movies and TV shows and storybooks and radio dramas, that.
Yeah, but I'm not. Look, I understand the product. The product is there, and there's more of it every day.
What makes it
But
good, though,
what
you're
makes it
asking?
so no? But why is that? Why is it resonating with us so much? That's my point. What is it about you and me? Not even about younger than us, older than us. I saw it in the theater. You probably first saw it on video or cable. But why is it as grown men we are still like? What is it as? Why does it still resonate with us? Is it the idea that it posits some sort of mythos that we find relatable to our own lives? Is it that we're just so fascinated by the sublime detail that goes into it? What is it that why
Well, it
of
does. It
all the
does.
things do we gravitate towards that?
Well, the Star Wars series, all of them, they do try to incorporate like a lot of the most entertaining ideas from science fiction and adventure stories from years past. I mean, they had like, I don't know, like 100 years of science fiction to work with, you know. And even today, you watch Star Wars and Star Wars properties, and like you can see they're stealing more and more ideas from more and more things, you know. And I don't have any problem with that. I mean, it makes it more compelling. You know, Star Wars is the elephant in the room. You know, it needs concepts, it needs ideas. You know, but yeah, I mean they're not afraid. Star Wars, you know, and even when Lucas was making Star Wars, you know, he had a lot of influences, you know, outside of science fiction too. You know, there's a certain, you know, the original Star Wars movies, there was a certain genius that Lucas brought to it, you know, and I think we have talked about this on the show about how genius Lucas was in incorporating like Eastern philosophy and, you know, Western sensibilities and sword fighting and, you know, all the action adventure stuff, and I mean, and the robots. I mean, it was just Lucas just put all this stuff together and made it work. And you know, it's sort of like Star Wars is sort of like a hybrid of everything that people were loving in entertainment at the time, and he put it all together, and it's fun.
It's just interesting to me that, people older than us boomers, they're much big fans of like The Godfather. They're big fans of 2001. And I think there has been a time where The Matrix looked like it might eclipse Star Wars, but Star Wars really, like, for whatever reason, it is just so part of the vernacular of this generation. And I all I can say is, older than you, having seen it from the movies when I was 11, it just changed not just when it came out, it didn't just change what science fiction films could look like or be, but it really did change what a hero's journey could look like, what characters could look like, what imaginary worlds could look like. And it also just changed what, if you could treat, I mean, 2001 is really the first science fiction film that's taken with a serious budget and a beautiful production design, but it's then kind of shoehorned into a philosophy story, whereas Star Wars, even though it wasn't made for a ton of money, looks like it was made for a ton of money, and it elevates the genre. And you and I have done a lot on science fiction. In fact, I would say we probably have dedicated, there's only one genre that we've spent more time on than science fiction. What do you think it is about science fiction for you that you find just so fascinating? Why does it draw you so often?
Well, I mean, as a kid, that was my favorite genre, and what do I like about? I don't know, Chris. I mean,
Well,
you know,
why are you so drawn to that as opposed to other genres?
I don't know. Autism? I don't know. I've never really been diagnosed, but
Well, I mean, but like, is it that we grew up in an era where technology kept on making leaps and bounds? Is it I grew up in an era of astronauts. You grew up in an era of
well,
shuttle
I am
pilots.
I am fond of saying we live in the future now because it seems like science fiction can't even keep up today with all the technological changes. But yeah, we live in a time of rapid technological change, and science fiction is a lot of it is concerned with trying to predict what technological changes are coming and what those changes are going to mean. And in certain ways, though, Chris, I feel like technology is a little bit overblown. Like we tend to, as a culture, we tend to think that technology is going to bring all these changes and change things, but I think in a lot of ways, or I think technology doesn't have as much impact as we think. I mean, maybe that's a crazy statement, but But yeah, I mean, because some science fiction is fun because it takes the influence of technology to an extreme. And so you watch it, you read it, whatever, and you see like all these effects that this technology can have, but those extreme effects never really happen in real life, Because I'll give you a good example, like Brave New World, the book. How in Brave New World, Huxley develops this technocratic society that's based around like the most. It's based around using technology to create the most efficient human society, but I don't think we've come anywhere close to a world like that, And the reason is because technology is really not that influential. Because what's most influential is us, human desires and wants and needs, and that's what influences the use of the technology. I mean, we like to think like 2001 is a perfect example. Like we like to think that the technology is going to come full circle and bite us on the butt, and the technology is going to come around and dictate our lives to us. It's like the old fear of the machines rising up and fighting us. It's like the war of the humans and the machines. But that's the fear in the back of people's minds. But that never really comes to be. That'll probably never come to be. We're never going to get to a place where. And I know, like, a lot of people say, oh, you're so wrong. But I don't think we'll ever get to a place where the technology is going to tell us how to live. Because I don't think we've ever gotten there, Chris. I just don't think life's like that.
I would say that you raised some good points. I would maybe just add that we live in an ever-increasing rationalistic world. And we're not a very religious world. We're not a very... the world we live in, we're just, as human beings, we're just every day having to hit technology. More and more is taking over our lives. I think that's a fair statement. I think that we live in a world of great cataclysmic upheaval, social upheaval. And I think what is very appealing about science fiction is it gives us a framing device for the world we live in. And it gives us a world beyond our own reality where we can explore and understand. And I think as our society becomes more confusing, it provides almost a safe space for, and that's true of fantasy as well. And I think the reason why you see more movies about superheroes and TV shows like Stranger Things and less cop shows and less Westerns, even though Westerns are making a comeback, is because I think we're less about the past or the actual world these days and more just trying to find the metaphoric analogy for the times we live in. The other genre, switching gears, that you and I have spent a ton of time on, and I think it really is even more personal to us, is comedy. We have done so many episodes about comedy, comedians, comedic films. You did one and I love this one, you have a Donald Trump borrows from stand-up.
Oh yeah, I described how Donald Trump is a stand-up. Like his aesthetically speaking, his delivery is not the delivery of a politician. He goes to rallies and he does stand-up. He's doing stand-up. That's what he's doing all the time, And then and you look at like his Twitter, his now dead Twitter account. I mean, he was using Twitter like stand-ups use Twitter. He just posts like material, jokes on his account, literal jokes he's posting, and that's his Twitter account.
Well, and certainly there are people like, Greg Gutfeld, who started out as a stand-up, who's now a Fox commentator. There are people like Joe Rogan and Bill Maher who kind of walk the line between being a stand-up, which they are, and also a political pundit. Certainly comedy I'd say in the last, since Jon Stewart, maybe in the last 20 years, has definitely become also a political arena. Not that political comedy didn't exist beforehand, but we've elevated comics to political commentators, and we now expect, I would argue, from our politicians, the ability to use humor to get their point across.
It is funny. Well, you look at Ukraine. I mean, I think.
Well, that's the ultimate, right? A guy who played the president of Ukraine in a comedy becoming the president of Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe it started with Jon Stewart, maybe it started before that, but this was a strange era where we have sort of, I don't think we ever talked about this on the show, but we have sort of elevated comedians, people who do stand up especially, into the role of public philosophers. I mean, if you look at TV, like 50s, 60s TV, 70s even, they have actual philosophers, right? People working in academic institutions writing books. They have them on TV shows to come and opine about cultural things in the culture, politics, whatever. But today we don't have those people. Like people like Noam Chomsky. They're never invited to talk on any kind of TV shows, right? But instead,
the ones I watch on cable, yes, but I get your point. I watch Democracy Now.
Right, right. He'll be on Democracy Now, but
he won't be on Meet the Press.
Right. So, but they'll have. Well, they don't have comics on Meet the Press, but they'll have Donald Trump. I mean, the thing is
right. Actually, and that's a good point. Exactly right, because Donald Trump does bring the stand-ups perspective on Meet the Press, and I've done TV, and this is a very key point, which is when you do live TV. I used to go on the news and talk about public speaking, and you only really have maybe 20 to 30 seconds to get your point across. So whenever possible, I did kind of interject, set a punchline into getting my point across, because a joke is one of the few things you can tell in about 20 seconds that will elicit a laugh. And that punchline setup, which you see in sitcoms, watching good politicians, I don't mean good in my moral sense. I mean that they know how to get their message across in 20-second sound bites. If they can also use humor, it just elevates them. Bernie Sanders is the same way as Donald Trump. He people comparing him to his cousin Larry David, not just for his accent, but because he does have that Jewish comics, that Borscht Belt comics way of letting that thing land on him. He uses attitude comedy to get his point across. Well, I don't really think so.
Bernie,
there's better ways of doing this.
Right. Well, Bernie's famous for being on message. Yeah, I mean,
but in a way that a good stand-up of his style would be.
Yeah, well,
it's what makes him engaging and entertaining.
Yeah, a lot of stand-ups, they're always on their material. They're always on they're not like ad-libbing or whatever. Now, Trump, he would ad-lib. He'd be constantly trying out new material. I mean, I talked about this in the episode. In the middle of his speeches, he'd be constantly trying out new material. He's constantly trying out new material.
Right. I don't want to revisit that episode whole. I just want to add on top of it by just expanding it out and seeing that, and in that sense, it's also something we didn't do an episode on, but we've kind of touched around, which is when comics transgress. When they go ahead.
Well, I just want to say you brought up a good point about how maybe the media landscape is such that the skill of the stand-up and the way stand-ups have always delivered their material, or have started to deliver their material in the modern times, maybe that meshes perfectly with the current media landscape. Maybe that's the only reason stand-ups are getting elevated like they are, because a public philosopher like Noam Chomsky can't go on like a night one of these night talk shows and do like 5 minutes and then go to commercial break. You know what I mean?
Well, there's
people are gonna tune out.
The famous theatrical director, playwright Harold Clurman, that laughter opens the mouth to get the castor oil down. Castor oil was what they used to give people in the 1930s to help them with their health. You can make something palatable. And we certainly have put, stand-up comics as MCs of our award shows. There's the press, the thing that they do for the DC press every year. I forgot what it's called, but normally the president's there. Trump hadn't been there, but Biden was there. This year it was Trevor Noah. So we have definitely elevated our comics to social philosophers, the Walter Lippmanns of the day. And in that sense too, when they transgress, when they do offensive work, I think part of the reason why we are much more likely to come down harder on them now is because they're not just somebody who's amusing you on a 2-drink minimum or just taking up 5 minutes on the Tonight Show. We've given them the power of truth teller. And the minute you give someone the power of truth teller, you're going to hold them to a much higher level of accountability.
And that comes to the question that we tried to ask. We asked on a couple of shows called "Does art influence the public mind?" Does it really matter what a stand-up says? Does it really matter what any artist says? I mean that's a good question we tried to answer, and I think our answer at the end actually was no. It doesn't matter what anybody says or does, but people really think it does. So I mean, I think it's still an open question. I mean, it's like every regime. Almost every political regime in the history of the world has tried to muzzle artists who said things they didn't like said, So,
Well,
so
it definitely feels like comedy, wouldn't you say, as far as stand-up stand-up comedy is definitely on the ascent. And I think even TV streaming comedy is definitely on the ascent. But where comedy is dying on the vine is in film. You and I grew up watching so many movie comedies, and I'm thinking to myself, the last only comedy I saw this whole year was the one of Nick Cage playing Nick Cage. I think it was.
Oh, I haven't seen that. Is it good?
A Staggering Talent, something like the way.
Is it good?
It's entertaining. It's okay. It was better than the Sandra Bullock movie I saw the week before. But are these great? Are these even like A plus? Or A level? No, these are at best B minus. These are B minus comedies, and I don't mean that in a mean way. I'm just meaning that they're funny, ha ha, ha, But we somewhere in the course of our life, all the comedic directors stopped making comedies, all the comedic actors stopped working in filmmaking comedies, and we'll maybe just do a whole episode on this at some point.
I don't. Yeah,
cinematic comedy is dead.
Well, I don't know if we talked about this on the show ever, but I feel like comedy is reaching an inflection point because comedy can only work when everyone's on the same page. You all have to be laughing at the same thing. You all have to be loving the same thing. You have to have the same values basically for comedy to work. And our society's become so fractioned that I don't know. I think that's the problem. Our society's become so split up that it's making comedy hard to work. I mean, especially with movies. How are you gonna make a broad tent movie? Because movies have to have a large audience. How are you gonna make a broad tent comedy anymore? It's impossible because the audience is too many different ideas in the audience.
Like my favorite comedic director right now is probably Taika Waititi, who when he's not making Thor movies is making pretty cool TV shows, and when he's not making cool TV shows, he does make cinematic comedies like Hunt for the Wilder People, or I can't remember the one that came after it with Hitler, but they're very thoughtful and very provocative. And while they're very funny, they're very, very, very specific. But in general, and maybe I'm definitely forgetting a few, the Wolves movie. There's like, all I can say, and we've done a lot on film anyway, and TV, is that I feel like right now comedy is hanging out more in essays, stand-up, television, to the degree that I guess if you are a comic, you can be an executive producer, you write the script. The comedy, someone like Bill Hader or what's his face from Ted Lasso, like today's former SNL talent. Damn, I can't believe I can't remember the name of the guy who Norm's nephew, the one from Ted Lasso.
I don't
played
know.
Joe Biden. Come on, you know it. He has a strange last name. Anyway, if you look at any of the big people, the Will Ferrells, all of the really interesting Saturday Night Live people, for the most part, from the last decade or two, Adam Sandler, yeah, they'll occasionally make a pretty decent movie or a cool indie film, but for the most part, they've decided they would rather work in TV where they're more the auteur.
Yeah, well, TV is it Jason Sudeikis?
Thank you.
TV is like I just looked it up. TV is like it's a much smaller audience, so than a movie. So I think that it is a better forum for comedy right now. I don't think we talked about it on the show, but what was that show with No, I can't remember the family. The rich family moves in the motel. Anyway,
Oh yeah, we did do that one. It was Schitt's Creek.
yeah,
Yeah,
Schitt's
and that's what
Creek
I'm
is a
saying. There,
wonderful
that
show.
would have
Yeah.
been originally a Christopher Guest movie, and now and Christopher Guest's TV stuff is not very good. But and actually, that's really interesting too, because I will say that the funny guys who made movies, most of them are not doing great work in TV. I don't really feel that Judd Apatow's TV work has really panned out. I like Noah Baumbach, but he does basically movies that just stream on TV. Uh, the Duplass brothers actually do well on TV. They're doing great stuff. But for the most part, right now, there's definitely a hibernation. So we've done a lot on the arts. The show is also called Entertainment. And we've done a lot of things on leisure time activities. And I always want to start off with just Thorsten Velblum. Can you again explain to us theory of the leisure class?
Yeah, so Veblen, like 100 years ago, 150 years ago, wrote a book, The Theory of the Leisure Class. It's, I mean, there's a lot of ideas in it. Are you talking about, Chris, the idea that,
What's just the simple definition behind it? What is his central premise?
I mean, I guess that the upper classes dictate the culture.
Right. And so therefore our entertainment always trickles down. And as you
Yeah.
have more money and more time, you want more entertainment. So a lot of the stuff that you and I have talked about on the consumer end of entertainment, we've done things on the art of pizza, we've done things on the art of candy, we've done things on Halloween
toys, candy. It was great to do those episodes, Chris, because I feel like those were topics. Those were like aesthetic topics that very few people probably ever talked about before,
and everyone takes for granted.
Yeah, people take it for granted, but it's like I almost wish, Chris, I almost wish that after the candy episode, somebody who works in that industry designing candy would have contacted us and wanted to do an interview. I mean, I thought that would have been great. I would love to ask them questions.
Well, maybe we'll do that next time out, because I felt like no matter what we did, whether it was the art of, costumes, candy, holidays, Christmas decorations, whatever it was, it all followed a very simple narrative, which is sometime at the end of the 19th century, definitely by the end of World War II. So let's say anywhere between like Coca-Cola in the 1880s to the American supermarket post-war America, it's almost always this very similar narrative of people who aren't from money, almost rarely from money, often immigrants, or they grew up poor, but they had scientific backgrounds or culinary backgrounds. And almost every one of them somehow involves the concept of mass market. Have you noticed that? There's a mass market movement, maybe normally in the early 20th century, where it just happens to be that as more people live in the cities or move to the suburbs or make a little bit more money, or as machines do a better job of fabricating on a larger scale, the thing, whatever the thing is, it grows exponentially.
Well, it's the effect of democratizing art, so that outsiders can get in. I mean, it's like anything else, It's like I think to a certain extent, art can be meritocratic, and you always see, within all art industries, like the people on top trying to close the wagons, and trying to make the circle the wagons, so that like nobody can get in. But that makes the art stagnate. I mean, you can see that.
But you know what I'm saying? I agree with what you're saying, but in some sense, it almost feels like a folk movement, like pizza, candy, soda. These are really cheap pleasures made for working class people that have elevated. I think one of the great things about America and our pastimes, especially our food, is so much of what is the great American. Like when you think of the great American food, right? Hot dog, hamburger, pizza.
food, candy. I mean, these things are entirely meritocratic. I mean, because
Right,
no
that's
one
the
takes them.
beauty
The
of
upper
it.
classes don't. Yeah, so the upper classes don't take them seriously as an art form. So whatever sells on the market sells, and whatever doesn't.
But
So, yeah,
but your cynicism is sometimes a little overwhelming and not necessary. And in this particular, no, I'm sorry, it's just true. You can only be snark on so much. But I think that what you was fascinating to me when we did pizza, which started out as peasant food, hot dogs, hamburgers, coffee, so many things that were to help an urban poor or a new emerging class. Somehow, America loves cheap stuff. I mean, you've been to Hearst Castle, right?
Yes.
So there, if you go on the tour, you see where Hearst entertained people, and like any American multimillionaire, there's these Heinz ketchups on every table, you know, and it is something kind of beautiful about the when we talk about consumerism that the things that are very popular, whether it's going to see a color movie or getting a flexible flyer or a bicycle or having popcorn or candy, it's something that the barrier of entry is deliberately designed for the poorest person or at least a working class person. And yet this country, just maybe because we're different than Europe, we just there's nothing gauche about having an M&M, right? Like there's nobody who go, I saw you eating an M&Ms. How bad is that? Everybody likes to eat jelly beans.
Okay, yeah, I
And I
see it.
think that and I think that in America, at least at the beginning, maybe all the way through to the end of the 20th century, we love trends and we love creating fads. And here we live in California, right? Birthplace of Baskin Robbins, Del Taco, McDonald's. What am I forgetting?
I don't know, McDonald's, Taco Bell.
And not just Southern California, but in this place, right, where the weather is always good, people always want to have cheap to go entertainments. This is really the testing ground for so much. I remember when I was living in New York growing up, people would say California is 5 years ahead of New York, and New York is 5 years ahead of the Midwest. So the Midwest is 10 years behind. And I don't mean that in a snarky way. I really don't. All I'm saying is that it is interesting that in our deeper population centers, where there's a greater diversity on the socioeconomic scale, on the ethnographic scale, because so much foreign food from other countries like pizza, tacos, Chinese food somehow becomes American food. You ever notice that?
Okay, yeah, yeah, sure.
So that's something that it's very embracing and inclusive. We're never more inclusive, really, than when it comes to entertainments. If something was entertaining in another country and it comes to America and it hits with a group of people beyond that ethnic group, it goes wide.
Well, I think the truth about America, and this is something that like the white supremacist crowd doesn't want to admit, but America's always been the land of the unwashed masses. I mean, America's always had a diversity of peoples and cultures, and I mean, it's just always been like that. I mean, even when it was just the natives here, I mean, the different tribes are all incredibly different. I mean, that's just how the Americas has always been. I mean, yeah. I mean, other places are like that, I'm sure, but I mean,
Yeah, and I'm not trying to be nationalistic. It's just something that America is known for because we are a giant cultural exporter. But bring it in a more different space. I want to bring up live performance because, this show was born of the pandemic. I don't think, I'll be blunt, Randall, I would not have agreed to have done this show with you had I not been bereft of everything else to do. When we first did this, you could step outside and die, or you could hang out and you could record. I felt like the guy from MST3K who used to be in a satellite floating around the Earth. It's just me floating around detached from reality. But now live performance is back, and live performance is such a unique beast. We're both live performers. I do storytelling, I do stand up, I produce storytelling shows. Randall, you have a strong background in improv. You photograph and record a lot of live performance. And we've done a lot on the magic of live performance. Do you feel like now it's pretty much gone back to normal-ish? What do you feel?
Probably. I mean, I haven't really been out there, so I don't know, but it feels like
Well,
I
I
see
was
listings.
just out there yesterday. So let me tell you, because I produced a storytelling show, I just stopped because, again, I have to make time for other things in my life. And yeah, were there people wearing masks? Yes. And were there people who said they didn't want to go? They were afraid not to get COVID? Yes. And did we test everybody to make sure that they had proof of vaccine? Not test, but we make sure that everyone showed proof of vaccination? Yes. So I do feel like on one hand, things are very different. But once you have people sitting in a dark room looking at someone on the stage, engaging them in an entertaining way, it's no different than it was back in 2019. Somehow we just get caught up in the moment of a live performer and we're transported again. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, well, yeah, we're opening up. It's going back. I mean, I think people are like tired of it. Nobody's going to be able to. People are sick of the lockdowns. I mean, I don't think we're going to be able to go back at this point.
Well, no. Instead, we're like, oh, okay, this is a risk I'm going to just take now that there are drugs to treat it, to prevent it, to lower the risk,
I'll say something else too, Chris. I remember when all these lockdowns started, all the hysteria started, and all the conservatives were talking about how one thing they like to say, oh, this is just the flu, this is nothing, and there was some hysteria. I mean, surfaces, there was hysteria about surfaces, there was hysteria about outdoor transmission. I mean, all those things, those two things didn't pan out. I mean, so this epidemic hasn't been as bad as a lot of people predicted. I mean, yes, we did take measures. So
well, we lost 1 million lives.
Yeah, I mean,
I wouldn't like. I mean, yeah, it was devastating.
I mean, listen, I'll say it this way.
Americans are dead.
I'll say it this way, Chris. We're about to go into a time right now where people are sick of the lockdowns, and we're getting like waves of new variants, and nobody is going to want to go into the new lockdowns. And I mean, we have a vaccine too, but nobody's going to want to go into the new lockdowns. So, we'll see what happens. I mean,
no, but you're raising such a good point. I definitely want to elaborate on it, which is that, now movie theaters are crowded again. We have blockbusters now bands going on tour. We didn't fucking talk about music. Damn it. We'll talk about music in a sec. Yeah, so definitely I feel like, and you don't see the pandemic discussed much in film or TV. We were all trying to get behind it. So let's talk about music for a minute, because somehow I forgot to talk about music. If this episode is airing the way it is, we've just interviewed someone on psychedelic rock, and we just did something on the musical biopic. I want to get back to something we had talked about a long time ago, and it's only been proven more so, which is that I said that out here in LA, and since then I've noticed in New York and San Diego, that radio and just in general, Gen X music has not gone away. It's there and it's just dominating. And there was a really good article I came across last night about what's going on. And right now, as we're speaking, a 1986 Kate Bush song called it's called "Make a Deal with God," but it's also called "Running Up That Hill, Make a Deal with God" from Hounds of Love. It was closing in. It's the number one song on iTunes. It's the number one song on Billboard, and there have been a lot of 80s revival, a lot of dominance. And I just want to let you know the article is on Stereo Gum. So if you go to Stereo Gum, it's everything old is new again and everything new is out of luck, which it's a great article. And I don't have the time. We could probably do a whole episode on how new music is going to struggle. But they cited a psychological study, and I really wanted, if we had done it then, I want to read it now because it's so cool. It says, psychologically, we tend to like older sounds more than newer ones. Discussing the 80s mixtape selections in a then new Guardians of the Galaxy, a 2014 Mike article notes, in numerous scientific experiments, researchers have shown that subjects are more likely to report positive feelings from a given piece of music if they've heard it before. Songs score even higher marks if they can trigger a specific stored memory, like a late summer night spent driving around with "Fool Around and Fell in Love" by on the radio. Familiar music is also as much more reliable way for people to induce good moods in themselves. In fact, in the emotional centers of the brains are more active when one listens to familiar music. Now, just want to say, I get there's two different things going on. Young people who've never heard Kate Bush are loving Kate Bush, and I love Kate Bush. So I'm going to put that conversation away for just a second. I want to expand on this because my girlfriend is also a psychology professor, and she explained to me that the way we remember music is much more profound. It's like the way we remember scent. But memory is kind of like a file cabinet. So yes, in that file cabinet where there is a Depeche Mode song like People Are People in your head, there might also be you being 23, going on a date, having a great time, dancing with a girl you met, while listening to that song. So it's never just the song. So it is fascinating to me from a Gen X perspective that we have now developed a much more intimate relationship with music if it comes from our past. And then it's fascinating. I mean, I'll be in the radio with my girlfriend, and a song will come on any of the stations, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we're singing along, and it's not like we planned it. And often we're singing in unison. I've done that with you. You and I've done karaoke. But I remember a long time ago when like Bohemian Rhapsody came on, and it was just like Wayne's World. We just started singing without even knowing that we knew the song together. It's almost a bonding mechanism.
Well, I've read that before recorded music, you would go to a pub or a bar. This is in Europe, of course, and you've heard of the drinking song, right? So people would be in bars, and what were drinking songs? They were songs. You'd go to a bar, everybody would be singing the song together,
like Danny Boy.
Yeah, so everybody would go to the bar, get drunk, and then sing together, and that used to be the thing. And then now you go to a bar, it's all recorded music.
But I think there's just something to be said. So I will say, from a Gen X perspective, I was listening to Morning Becomes Eclectic on NPR, and they were playing just new music, and it was fabulous, beautiful 1 hour of brand new music. And I won't lie, all of it sounded somewhat like music from the 80s, 70s, and 90s, but all in a very new way. So it's tough because part of me, middle-aged 56-year-old man, has a hard time connecting to new music unless there is something identifiable in it. So, but on the other hand, I have a cousin, he's a musician. He is about 15, 20 years younger than me. I love his music. And he's gotten radio play. Maybe we'll get him on the show if I can ever convince him. And his stuff is definitely of its own sound, but I do think that there's like two different things going on. One is, and this is what's good about that Stereogum article, young artists people think that all music today is just dance music or hip hop or massively overproduced stuff. No, there's great bands making beautiful rock and roll that would make your soul sing, but they don't have the access. And if you do want to hear that stuff, you're getting the tried and true catalog music. And I don't think it's not bad, because certainly Kate Bush was never appreciated in America in her own time. But at the same time, there is a certain, what would you say, conservatism going on, Randall?
Well, I don't know, Chris. It's just, I know that catalog music is selling better than new music, first time ever. I mean, it's the whole market's changed, because before the internet, and I knew that I had a feeling, I knew that this was going to happen with the internet, how it would change art. The internet provides a perfect catalog of everything all the time. Just look at like Spotify, for instance, YouTube. And that never happened before in the past. You'd have to go to a record store to buy stuff, and to buy old stuff, it'd have to be reissued. But of course, the record companies make more money on the new stuff, so they would not try to reissue back catalog as much. They want you to buy the new stuff. They'd push that stuff. But now it's like, it's like the horse is out of the barn.
Well, I mean, you look at how famous artists like Bruce Springsteen and Paul Simon and Bob Dylan are selling their catalogs for hundreds of millions of dollars. So now you really will see large companies owning the rights to music. And I actually think, if anything, it's ensuring that those music catalogs will be played even more, because it's one thing for, Bruce Springsteen to collect a residual on a song. It's another thing for a company that's just spent $400 million on, I think it really is $400 million or $200 million on the entire Bruce Springsteen catalog. They got to recoup.
I
They
almost
got to
see
make 4 times that profit, which means they've got to find new and exciting ways of getting that Bruce Springsteen song to you.
the internet could be like, maybe not to be okay, maybe I'm being okay, I'm gonna be slightly too apocalyptic, but the internet could be the end of art, because in a sense, because once all art ever made becomes available to everyone all the time, then why make new art?
Footnote that for a future episode, because that is its own episode. Uh, I didn't have a chance to talk about theater, so I'm going to take a minute to take about it, because I know that live performance isn't just theater. I did see a wonderful play by a friend of mine, Tom Alper. He did it here in West Hollywood. I haven't seen a legit Broadway production yet. I will be going to New York, hopefully, in the next month or two. I'm looking forward to seeing some great theater. I see the Tonys is doing stuff. Theater is definitely back. Uh, you know what? I really do feel like, if next time when we come back, I'd like to spend more time on theater. We never really get into theater that much, possibly because you're not a big theater person. Is that right, Randall?
Yeah, I
It's
guess that's
okay.
fair to say.
Yeah, no, that's okay. There's things I'm not
But you're a
into.
big theater person. We've done
Right,
lots
but
of theater shows
I know,
around your interests, I thought.
no, but we haven't done. I never felt like we've gotten. It's tough to say what to do with theater, and there's so many great theater essay shows on right now. But I will say that overall, what I've noticed with the state of theater is, in my opinion, it's a little stagnant, contemporary theater. I think that there's no comedy. And if you think comedy is bad in film, oh, brother, it's terrible in theater. There's just no comedy. I think that while it's great that theater has become more inclusive and diverse, it also seems to be much more agenda driven. So a lot of the plays on Broadway, in my opinion, are less about exploring humanity and more about making a statement on society. And I don't mind statements on society, but I feel like you do need to have a balance between that which informs and that which entertains. I'm not a great fan of how many movies are becoming musicals is disgusting, and I can't fight it. So I'm just saying it's, and I just am not happy with the fact that theater is getting more and more expensive. I did want to see the Lehman trilogy here in Los Angeles, but it was going to cost me $150, which is a serious amount of money, or I could pay $70 to get an obscured view. You really can't. This is another thing about theater. If it prices itself out, it'll wind up like opera, and it'll live in a place of irrelevance, or it will only cater to super wealthy people who use it as a form of status. And that's all I want to say on theater. Randall, before we go on our very long hiatus, is there some subject you want to take a few minutes to just chat about?
Oh, well, I had a list, but we covered a lot of stuff, so I don't think I need to talk about anything, Chris. We covered everything.
Okay, well, first off, Randall, it's always been a lot of fun working with you. I always find that before we start the show, I think I do a lot of pre-production. You do a lot of post. So I'll talk to you, Randall. We'll make talking points. We'll go and watch the movies or read the journals. We'll do our research, the Wikipedia entries, whatever. And then if we both come into this, I think it's fair to say, and at some point, whatever the show was that we thought we were going to make, if the show goes really well, it's something better than what we planned. And I think we always surprise each other. We don't always agree with each other, but I've always found your opinions highly enlightening. And I hope maybe mine have been too to you. But anyway,
Well, I've never know what you're gonna think about anything, Chris,
it's a
and
conversation.
and sometimes I've been surprised by it's funny because like sometimes I'm surprised by how conventional your opinions are on certain subjects, and then sometimes I'm surprised by how radical your opinions are on certain subjects. I mean, it's hard to pigeonhole you, Chris.
Oh, thank you, Randall. And I think the same for you. I think you're a very unique thinker. And it's also great when we have guests on, too, because they challenge. I think it's impossible when two friends host a show not to work towards common ground. if only for the sake of your friendship. So it is nice when we get that third wheel to throw us a monkey wrench into the harmonious relationship
Well,
that
when
we
we have a
have.
guest on, it's usually about the guest, right? It's
Yeah.
not about our opinions,
And
which
then
is
and
how it
then we
should
just
be.
grill them. We just take them to the mat. They always go. They always no. They always have a good time. But we're like, you're not gonna. Uh,
All the guests we've had on though have been great. I mean,
no,
because
they've been awesome.
they all. I mean, we make sure that they know the subject, and they all like know these subjects inside and out way better than we do.
I
So
will
it's
say
been
this
great.
about your brother. If even if he wasn't your brother, he'd just be a tremendous guest.
Oh well, he's. I mean, yeah. Just if you're interested in the shows with my brother, I mean, he is a leading founder of the NFT technology. I mean, that's not even. I'm not even overstating it. So I mean, and he's running a website that creates NFTs. I mean, so yeah.
All right. Well, then, guys, I want to thank everybody who's watching us on YouTube or listening to us on any of the podcast networks that we're on, because it is going to be a while before we get back. If, again, as Randall said, if you want to do the show, if you've got your own podcast, you want to interview us, we certainly don't mind that. Or you want us to come on our show, or if you have some great ideas, this is a good time to really write to us. Again, what's the best way to reach us, Randall?
Well, Facebook is good. Just do Facebook. I mean, I think there's an email on our site actually that nobody's ever used, but
And
it's
just
there. It's
use
my personal
Facebook.
email, Chris.
Oh,
Somebody could just email me,
what's your
but no one ever
personal
has.
what's your personal email again?
Well, it's on the website. rjmills at gmail.com, two L's. That's my personal email. You know what? If you go to my Facebook page, which I don't know, I guess you have to have Facebook, but you can go to my resume. Okay, I'll tell you this. You can go to my resume at rjmills.me, two L's, and my phone number is right there. You could text me. You could call
All
me
right.
up. It's
Well,
been on
that
the internet for years, Chris.
we definitely, again, it's going to be a while, guys, and when we come back, it is more of going to be a show where either Randall and I are getting together because we really have something to say, and we're going to talk about something that really gets us excited, or we're going to interview someone that gets us. We just really want to get, but it's been great. It's been a pleasure. It's been a privilege to do this for the last 2.5 years. And wherever you are, or whenever you're listening to this, you now have 100 episodes to get lost in. And I hope you do, because there is no syndication deal coming. Randall, thank you so much.
Welcome.
I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
We'll talk again.
All
Bye.
right, bye.